Thank you. Thank you for joining us, Julio. We appreciate it. It is now 2 after 1. So hopefully people have had a chance to get up, stretch, go do what they needed to do. And Julio, we're going to start right in. I would like to introduce Julio Giordano, is an associate professor of dairy cattle biology and management in the Department of Animal Science at Cornell University. His expertise is in dairy reproduction, health, and the implications of herd performance on the economics of dairy farms. His basic research focus on the mechanisms controlling reproductive function and changes in physiological parameters during disease in dairy cattle. His applied program uses novel techniques or technologies to develop a reproductive and health management programs for dairy cattle. Dr. Giordano's laboratory strives to enhance the reproductive performance, health, and productivity of cows, thus the economic viability of dairy farms. And with that, thank you very much for joining us, and we are looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Great, thanks a lot, April. Just to confirm, you can hear me well?
Excellent.
Excellent, very good. Thanks again for the great introduction, and I really would like to thank the organizing committee for the conference for considering me and inviting me to be part of the conference. It's always great for me to share the research and the experiences that we have through our research with dairy producers, consultants, and extension personnel. So today I'm going to be talking about the implications of reproductive management on reducing heifer rearing cost in dairy farms. So for today, I thought that I would outline my presentation through a series of questions that dairy producers and consultants may have, and try to provide some data to answer some of those questions. So the first one is, what's the impact of time to pregnancy or days open for heifers on the heifer enterprise economics? So what's the potential value of reducing days to pregnancy on heifer rearing cost? Related to this, and this comes from a question that I get on a regular basis from dairy producers and consultants, is if there are any potential negative implications of earlier age at first calving on the reproductive performance of first lactation cows. So if by calving earlier, they would struggle as first lactation cows. We're gonna also be talking about the programs and the strategies that we have available to effectively submit heifers for insemination at detected estrus. So how do we breed heifers in heat? So how do we have effective programs, and what are some of the important things for those programs? We will do the same for time AI programs. So what are some of the programs that are available? What kind of expectations we can have, and what are some of the pros and the cons of using time AI? And finally, I hope to discuss some of the research that we have recently done looking at what are the implications of different types of reproductive management programs on the profitability of heifers, or on, again, the economics of the heifer enterprise. So these are several questions, and I hope that you learn something, but I really hope that what you learn is not what this guy has learned during a webinar, which is to sleep on his desk. So I really hope that you learned something useful today, and you can stay awake after lunch. So to the first one, what are the implications of reducing age at first calving through reducing time to pregnancy on the heifer enterprise economics? And I want to make this very clear here. All that we're going to be talking about during my presentation, it's what we can do to get heifers pregnant earlier. Once that they become eligible to become pregnant, once that the farms decides to start breeding heifers because they have reached the age or size that they want to get them pregnant, and not necessarily have to make them grow faster, or what are the implications of faster growth rates on age at first calving and therefore economics. So this is all about getting them pregnant earlier once that they become eligible for pregnancy. So what are the implications? What's the value of reducing days open? You're going to be hearing a lot about this today. Everybody knows that raising heifers is expensive. Jason Carsis is going to give a talk highlighting the results of a study that they have done recently for this. And this is actually the average number that I got from their study. So for heifers that were part of their study, the average cost of raising one all the way from calving to, from birth to calving, it was about $2,500. And when you think about the total cost of raising a heifer from birth to calving, we can divide that whole period of time in different sub periods. And these are periods that you know really well: the liquid phase, the post-weaning, before breeding phase, then we have breeding and gestation. And the point that I like to make when I show this graph is that it is really difficult to make any of these periods, the liquid phase, the pre-weaning phase, and the gestation period, any shorter. It is really hard to shorten these periods because of biological limitations, because we, even though we could feed them better, we could treat them better, it's really, really hard to have a very significant impact on the duration of these periods. And even when we want to reduce the duration of these periods of time in the non-lactating period of an animal, it may even be very expensive. On the other hand, we have the breeding period here, which is the one that we can have an impact through better repro management, and we can shorten a lot. And we can shorten a lot this period just by, as we will see later today, by putting semen on them and by making sure that they get pregnant when we put semen on them. But the thing is that economically, we can have a pretty substantial impact by making this period of time very, very short. And we're not going to be fighting with the biology of the animal. We are assuming that they have the size to get pregnant. It's just a matter of making this as short as possible. So we wanted to look at the implications of that. So we used some data. So retrospectively, we look at data from a study that we ran at 3 commercial farms in New York State. And we wanted to answer a very simple question. What's the economic value of reducing age at first calving through earlier pregnancy? So we have about 1,100 heifers. These farms started breeding heifers at about 12 months of age, so 368 plus minus 10 days of age. And we divided heifers in 3 groups: a low, medium, and high age at first calving group. And because we had multiple farms, we did this within farms, so we have a range and not just an average for each age group. So it was about 20.2 to 21.8 for the low, 21.4 to 22.8 for medium, and 22.1 to 28.7 for the high age at first calving group. So some of you may see these numbers and think, well, probably, this is not necessarily representative of my situation, but these are, again, commercial farms that, I have to say that did work really well with their heifers, and they already tried to reduce their age at first calving. So we are, talking about reducing age at first calving within a relatively small range of age at first calving. So to look at this, we did a very thorough economic analysis looking at what we call an analysis of profitability per slot per unit of time. So we followed these heifers for 15 months after they became eligible for pregnancy. So we wanted to capture all the rearing period and part of the first lactation, so we could account for the value of these heifers starting their first lactation earlier or later. So long story short, we accounted for all the breeding costs, feeding costs, some fixed costs, replacement costs during the rearing period, as well as during lactation. And then during lactation, we accounted for income over feed costs. And through that, we calculated cash flow, again, in dollars per slot per 15 minutes, per 15 months, not minutes, that would be very short. And I'll briefly walk you through some of the most critical results. So first, we wonder what were the factors that generated the biggest difference in age at first calving. And just as you would expect, those were age at first breeding, so when they were inseminated. So we found significant differences with the low age at first calving group being bred earlier than the high and the medium age at first calving group. And you know, this just follows the trends. And this is just what you would expect, right? So they are bred earlier, so they have a chance of getting pregnant earlier. But very importantly and very interestingly too is the difference in first service conception rate, which you will see in my presentation has P bar AI, pregnancies per AI, that's conception rate. So heifers pregnant or inseminated. And what is interesting is that the differences in age at first calving were mostly generated by the chance of heifers getting pregnant to first service. So the low age at first calving group were the ones that became pregnant at first service. And then, so they had, 96% conception rate, then 33% for the medium group and 0.3% for the high group. So basically none of the heifers in the high group became pregnant at first insemination, and about a third of them in the medium age at first calving group. So in a way, I really like this data because it shows you the value and the importance of getting heifers bred early, which is what we see through age at first insemination, and then the value of getting them pregnant once that they are inseminated. It's the number one factor that generated the differences in age at first calving. Then when looking at economics, the results just follow exactly the trends that you would expect. This is interesting more than anything to have an idea of the magnitude of the differences in economics due to the difference age at first calving. So about $40 on average for the low age group. This is total cost to breed these heifers during rearing. $57 for the medium group and $95 for the high group. And these are all significant, statistically significant differences, but very importantly, economically significant differences, right? I'm sure that all of you want to have $40 on average than $95 on average to get these heifers pregnant. We also have the total cost during rearing, and similar than for repro costs, we have a trend in favor of the low group. So it's more expensive, just as you would expect, to raise the ones that had later age at first calving. The opposite with first lactation profit, whereby the greatest profit, just like you would expect, is for the low age at first calving. They just start making milk earlier, they start making money earlier, and therefore, when you look per fixed amount of time, in this case 15 months, they're going to make more money than the high age at first calving group. And at the end of the day, the numbers that matter the most is the aggregation of all of this. When you look at total cash flow for these heifers for this 15-month period, of course they are all negative because they have not paid for all the rearing costs yet within 15 months after they became eligible for pregnancy. So what matters here is the differences. So what are the differences between the groups? So $138 in favor of the low versus the medium age at first calving group, and $441 in favor of the low versus the high age at first calving group. So the medium age at first calving group costed on average $138 more during this 15-month period, and the high age at first calving group costed $441 more in these 15 months than the low age at first calving group. And you kind of see the difference here too between the high and the medium group. So in summary, time to pregnancy after heifers become eligible to become pregnant matters economically. So it can lead to substantial benefits such as reduced reproductive cost, reduce rearing cost after the beginning of the insemination period, earlier first lactation revenue, which leads to more profits per unit of time. And very importantly, and again, has a take-home message to you from a management perspective, is all about those days to first insemination, and very importantly, the fertility or the conception rate of that first breeding. So in a way, the message should be that farms should invest as much as they can on that first insemination to get as many heifers pregnant as possible at that first insemination to reduce average age at first calving, and therefore raising costs and the burden of the heifer enterprise. So then to the next question, which was whether reducing age at first calving would have negative impacts on reproductive performance. We were curious about that because we usually get that questions from farms. So there are always concerns with calving heifers a little too early. So we have looked at this again in a retrospective study, in this case with data from 5 commercial farms in New York State, about 2,200 heifers. Similarly than for the previous one, we divided them in a low, medium, and high group, and the average was 21.5, 22.1, and 23.5 months of age at first calving. And here you can see as well the ranges 18.5 to 22.4, 21.3 to 23.3, and 21.8 to 29.7. I do have to say that, you know, the distribution of age at first calving within groups are pretty tight, but we always have the extremes, right? There are probably very, very few heifers that calved at 18.5 months, probably was 1, and then very few that calved at 29.7 months. Interestingly, for this study, and this was possible because we were doing another study at these 5 farms, is that heifers in their first lactation, so as first lactation cows, they were bred through 2 types of programs that rely more on heat breeding, so on detection of estrus, or programs that rely a lot more on synchronization, a lot more aggressive use of time AI. So the beauty of this is that we got to see how these heifers responded when bred mostly through heat breedings or when bred mostly through time AI. And in the interest of time, I'll show you very quickly just the summary, the outcomes that were most important from this study. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have for the Q&A session. So I'll just give you the take-home messages. And the main take-home message was that we did not observe any significant negative consequences for heifers in the low and medium age at first calving groups. So it does not seem as calving at the ages that I should show you. So on average at 21.5, 22.1 months of age with the ranges that I mentioned, it did not seem to have any at least significant or major negative consequences on their reproductive performance as first lactation cows. And we looked at percentage bred in heat. We looked at first service conception rate, whether they were bred at detected estrus or through time AI. We look at cows pregnant at 200 days in milk. And we also look at the percentage sold and died by 200 days in milk. So we looked at all of these outcomes, which they basically are the most critical outcomes that you may want to look at for reproduction. And you know, if some of you are thinking about the 21-day pregnancy rate, it would probably be captured by pregnant by 200 days in milk, and also by the service rate and the conception rate that we also looked at. And in fact, we saw some positive effects. We saw some benefits for the low and the medium age at first calving group. And this was for cows bred in heat for first insemination, whereby there were some more bred in heat in the low and medium age at first calving group. and they were more pregnant by 200 days in milk for these two groups as compared to the high age at first calving group. So take home message, long story short, for heifers from 5 commercial farms in New York within that range of age at first calving, and with those averages that I showed, no major or noticeable negative consequences on reproductive performance when they were cows. So now we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about what are the options that we have to breed non-lactating heifers, and what are some of the good things, the bad things, and what are some of the expectations that we can have. So the first one, as you would expect, the oldest, the simplest, the one that probably most, if not all of you use with your heifers, is breeding after detection of estrus with heat detection, right? So long story short, we know that programs that use predominantly insemination at detected estrus can be successful. And I'll show you data for that later in my presentation. So very simple, heifers that show heat after natural heats, no synchronization whatsoever, or induce heats with prostaglandin treatments every 11 days or 14 days or even different intervals. There is basically no significant differences in heat expression and in conception rate. The key factor, as you would expect, is going to be heat detection. So we're going to be talking a little bit more about that. First of all, we have to think about the heifer itself. So, and about the potential of heifers to show heat. And if you look at research, and in my personal experience working with commercial farms, I always tell people that expression of estrus, so heat expression, should not be, and I always say it's not, but I say it should not be a limitation for dairy heifers, okay? Heifers do not have the same issues that we have with lactating cows for expression of estrus. They are not making milk. They don't have the same metabolic challenge that lactating cows have. They don't struggle with the early lactation health issues that we do have in lactating cows. So as long as heifers are well fed, they are in good health, and they are in reasonable environmental conditions, there are not a lot of reasons why they would not show heats, okay? So I'm pretty convinced of this, and again, I think that most of you would agree that when this is the case, when heifers are well taken care of, they're gonna be pretty good at showing heats, and they're gonna get pregnant when they are inseminated through that heat breeding. So in my experience and through our research, what we have seen that most of the time is about management. So it's about the program that the farm has in place and uses for heat detection. So in general, you know, it's about, you know, something failing with the estrus detection program. And you can start right there, and it's very simple, just improving estrus detection, and it can be very simple by improving detection of estrus with whatever traditional method is being used, visual observation, tail pain, tail patches, whatever it is. You can teach your heifers to watch each other and let you know when they are in heat. But you also may consider the use of technology, and we have today several automated estrus detection systems available that they can be put on different parts of the heifer body, the neck, the legs, the ear, the rumen, and they can be used for detection of estrus. So thinking that heifers are pretty good at expressing estrus, you would expect that these automated estrus detection systems can be effective at detecting heifers in estrus. So I thought I would show you some of the studies that have looked at this. So basically the use of automated estrus detection systems for detection of estrus in non-lactating heifers. And I'm gonna make it relatively short. So I'm gonna show you two studies. This is one first study in which neck-mounted sensors from a very popular commercially available system was used. And basically there was no significant difference in the percentage of heifers detected in estrus and conception rate to first insemination for the automated estrus detection system or the tail head mounted detectors. Basically these ones, these tail head mounted patches. So the sticky patches that go in the tail head is what was compared. So there was no difference in first service rate. So the speed at which heifers were bred. And there were no significant differences in first service conception rate for AI breedings, so for inseminations, and even for a percentage of these heifers that received embryo transfer. So this farm where the study was done was using embryo transfer, so some of the breedings were for embryo transfer, and there were no significant differences. Another study, in this case done in Canada, but with an ear-attached automated estrus detection system, also from a very popular system that is commercially available. So it detected, so they were looking at the ability of the system to detect heifers in heat. So more than 90% of the heifers were detected in heat. And then there was, which is also important, the false positives, right? So the heifers that the system tells you that they are in heat and they may not be in heat. The percentage of those was relatively reasonable. It was less than 10%. So the sensitivity was 91% again. So that's the number that I used to say the majority of the heifers were detected in heat. And then they had 8% false positive alerts and a positive predictive value of 83.5%. Basically, the percentage of heifers detected in estrus by the system that were truly in estrus. So long story short, automated estrus detection systems have been demonstrated to be effective, but not necessarily superior to traditional methods for detection of estrus, at least under research conditions. And I say this because what that means is that there were people using a really good gold standard, right? So the gold standard it was compared to was consistent. So for these studies, they were making an effort to detect estrus in the control group, right? So for there is a struggle with heat detection for whatever reason, it is possible that these automated estrus detection systems may be a lot better than what is in place now. So, but under conditions in which the heat detection program with whatever traditional method is used, visual, tail paint, tail patches, you can probably expect that heat detection will not be a whole lot better or it will be the same. So these technologies are certainly a useful tool for farms that are implementing reproductive management programs that depend a lot on heat detection. So if the decision is to go with a program that depends on catching heifers in heat, you better have a good heat detection program, and these automated detection systems may be an option. We will now go the other way. We're going to talk about time AI. So do we have time AI programs available, and what are some of the good things and bad things about these programs? So short answer is yes, we do have effective time AI programs for heifers. However, as you would expect, they require giving heifers more than one hormonal treatment. We have to give them more than one injection. And this may be really, really difficult to implement for some commercial farms. As you would expect, they may also be more expensive given the need to give these hormonal injections and the cost of the hormones, consumables, and then the labor associated with giving these hormonal treatments. However, more costly doesn't mean less profitable. So it's always about cost and revenue, and they may cost a little bit more, but they may increase revenue, right? So they may be more profitable through their potential impact on reducing days to pregnancy. And I'll show you this in a moment when we talk about the impact of different programs to breed heifers for first insemination. So if I'm asked today, what is a really effective program to put semen on non-lactating heifers through time AI, is what you have here on this slide. So it's the 5-day coasting protocol with progesterone supplementation, basically with a seeder device. So it's the only commercially available product that we have. So a GnRH at the random stages of the estrus cycle, put the progesterone device in or the seeder in. 5 days later, we pull the seeder out, give the first prostaglandin. I'm going to say some commercial names for you to be familiar with more than prostaglandin. So Lutalize, Estrumate, Prostamate. So any of the prostaglandin products available. Another prostaglandin a day later. And finally, 2 days after the second prostaglandin or 3 days after the seeder is pulled out and the first prostaglandin is given, we give them GnRH and breed at the same time. I'm very happy to talk in more detail about this protocol or other protocols in the Q&A session. So what can you expect in terms of results from this type of program? Research would say that you can expect conception rates in the range of 55 to 65% when using conventional semen, and probably about 85 to 90% of this when you use sex semen. I would venture to say, based on my experience, and if the heifers are in good condition and this program is implemented properly, that you should expect to be closer to 65% than 55% conception rate. So we have effective programs to put semen on heifers through Time AI. 5-day coaching protocol with progesterone supplementation is probably the best we have today, and you can expect conception rates in the 55 to 65% range. So we are getting to the end now. And one of the questions that we had at the beginning was, which are the most effective and profitable reproductive management programs for heifers? So we talked about programs that use a lot of heat detection and probably use none or very little Time AI. I show you Time AI programs that some farms may use, as the only strategy, at least to put semen on heifers for first insemination. So we have this whole spectrum of a lot of heat breathing or almost all heat breathing, and then all Time AI. And of course, you could have strategies in between. So then we wonder, are these all AIE or all heat breathing programs or all Time AI programs the best alternative for heifer management from a repro performance and an economic perspective? What are the implications of estrus detection efficiency when we have programs that depend a lot on estrus detection? And you will see how important it is to think about this. For farms that are thinking about using heat detection as the main strategy to put semen on their heifers, what if that's not working really well? And what if it is mostly due to management? And finally, what about programs that are kind of in between? Programs that they try to take advantage of heat detection as much as possible, but also use Time AI and use Time AI a little bit more aggressively to deal with those heifers that are not inseminated and detected estrus. So the thing is that a few years back and still today, I think that we could safely say that, what was best, it was not totally defined, in particular from a profitability perspective. Not a lot of research looking at profitability of these different programs for heifers. So we did some research in this area, working with some commercial farms in New York State. And one aspect that is important about our study that I want to emphasize now and I'll emphasize later. So 2 of the farms where we ran this study had really good estrus detection because they were putting an effort on detecting heats as much as possible. And then there was a 3rd farm that they put less effort, and it was their own decision. I mean, it was their philosophy, it was their way of doing things to not put so much attention on heat detection. So heifers became eligible for pregnancy at 12 months of age. Everybody was bred with sex semen for first insemination. And after that, everybody received conventional semen, no matter the treatment. So I'm going to describe the 3 strategies that we compare from the least use of time breathing to the most use of time breathing for first insemination. So the first strategy is relatively simple, and I'm sure that some of you use something like this. Heifers got, at the beginning of the breeding period, prostaglandin, and they received up to 3 prostaglandins. So we try to breed as many as possible in heat, and we didn't want anybody or the fewest possible to get time AI. However, to make sure that everybody was bred, we used the 5-day coursing protocol to time AI the ones that were not bred in heat. Then we have an intermediate program. We have one that still tries to take advantage of heat breedings as much as possible, but uses time AI more aggressively. So for this one, we had 2 prostaglandin treatments 14 days apart. We only bred heifers in heat after the second prostaglandin. And within 9 days of the second prostaglandin, the heifers that were not bred in heat, they received the 5-day coursing protocol to get time AI. This, for those of you that work with lactating cows, this is basically a pre-sync off-sync, but for heifers with some modifications. And the important modification is the use of 5-day coursing for the time AI and fewer interval from the second prostaglandin to the beginning of the time AI protocol. And finally, the most aggressive use of time AI was with 100% time AI for first insemination using the 5-day coursing protocol. So again, we went from trying to breed everybody in heat through the use of prostaglandin treatments to something in between, breeding in heat after the 2 prostaglandins and breeding after the second prostaglandin and time AI for the non-bred in heat. And finally, the most aggressive use of time AI for the final group. So these are the 3 strategies, and I want to show them at the end again, just to remind you that these are 3 strategies that commercial farms that are able to use some sort of synchronization will be using. So now we're going to look at what were the results. So what were the implications of using these programs for repro performance and, very importantly, for economics. So I want to remind you again the differences between farms A and B. So those were the ones that had the best heat detection, and farm C was the one with poor heat detection. So I know that a lot of you are not very familiar looking at these survival curves. I'll make it very simple for you. What we are looking at here is the pregnancy rate. So how fast heifers became pregnant for the first 100 days after they were supposed to get pregnant. And the faster heifers got pregnant, the lower the line in here. So long story short, there were differences between the different repro programs. The program with all-time breeding was better than the program with 3 prostaglandins and all heat breedings. And the combined program, just like you can see the red line, it was right in between. So even for this is just for farms A and B. For the farms with good heat detection, even for those farms that do well with heat detection, they actually did better with the time AI program than with the all heat detection program, at least for time to pregnancy. Farm C, the one with poor heat detection, in this case, the differences were abysmal. The 100% time AI program was better than the other 2, and it was a whole lot better than the program with all heat detection. And even the program, the combined program, the one that uses heat detection and then time AI more aggressively, it just didn't do as well at this farm just because heat detection was so poor that the time AI program was a whole lot better than that one as well. So going back to the idea here, for these farms that struggle with heat detection, programs with time AI can be really effective to get heifers pregnant. So now we're going to look at economics, and I really don't want to spend a whole lot of time looking at all the different economic values. I just want you to know that we look at this in detail. Again, this was for 15 months after the end of the voluntary waiting period. We accounted for all repro costs, for rearing costs, for first lactation profit. And when we aggregate all the cash flow from these heifers, so what we saw is that for farms A and B, so the ones with good heat detection, the combined program, the one that used heat detection first and then time AI more aggressively, was $52 better than the old heat detection program. And the old Time AI program was $43 better than the old heat detection program. So both programs that use Time AI did better than the old heat detection program by about $40 to $52. So a take-home message, even for farms with good heat detection, these programs that use Time AI more aggressively, and it seems like the best one is the one that actually combines heat detection at first and then uses Time AI to put semen on the ones not bred heat. That's the best for this type of farm. And finally, for farm C, the farm with poor heat detection, here the differences are even greater. And basically, I think that I have, yeah, okay. Yeah, so for, the Time AI program is $118 better than the old heat detection program. And you can see that the combined program doesn't do any better than the old heat detection, just because heat detection was so poor that it didn't work that well in this case. And you can see how the old Time AI program was also better than the combined program by $132. So it's kind of a no-brainer for farms that struggle with heat detection. And if they cannot improve heat detection by any other means, that what I talked about earlier, the use of Time AI, at least for first insemination, can be a really good strategy to reduce rearing costs and improve the cash flow of the heifer enterprise. By no means I'm telling everybody that Time AI is the solution to everything. It's a tool that when used properly, it can help improve reproductive performance and the heifer enterprise rearing economics.
Julio.
Yes, I'm
So
just finishing up.
Thank you. We've got.
So I wanted to thank you and all of those that made possible this research, all the funding agencies, and especially my group. And thank you very much. And I will be very happy to answer any questions.
So we're going to let Paul turn around here and monitor the questions. And people that needed to get up and take a break, go ahead. And Paul, here you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Julio. A lot of great material there. And again, if you joined our session,